The fanfiction where Randy gets put on death row. Written by hatsunoid and bandtrees. Audiobook Part 2. Chapter 4. Escape the Chain of Misfortunes. Well, it could have gone worse. That was all Randy could tell himself as he came down from his nectar-induced high, slung across the piece of trash in his dumpster best resembling a bed, in part due to the squishiness of various rotted fruits. For all his situation sucked, killing a man had taught him one very important thing. If you think you've hit rock bottom, it could always get worse. He didn't know where the others were, and didn't want to think about it. He'd rather get arrested and sent to the slammer than face Oliver, God forbid Karen, God forbid Bigfoot, again after what had happened. He knew it, and the weight of their hands as they piled out of the restaurant to carry him to safety, rather, as Bigfoot carried him and the others watched in varying degrees of horror, unease, and relief that this was a decent excuse to finally go the fuck home. He knew they knew. They were just awaiting his execution day. Waiting for when they could turn to the papers and go, "Yep, that's Randy Jade. Can I be financially compensated for being in his presence now?" God. 25 years he'd spent on this phone godforsaken planet now, and this was all he had to show for it? Some selfish part of his scrambled-up brain resented the fact his friends took him back to his dumpster. Surely they all, excluding Bigfoot, had nicer homes than the literal, actual dumpster. Even the tent would have been nice. But he supposed it made sense. He wouldn't want to invite a drugged-out murderer into his house either. He felt sick. Even the dumpster wouldn't be his for much longer. It'd been a few days since he showed up to either job. After all, what was the point? Was he really going to spend his last days as a free man, slaving away wrangling swans? Sex-talking sad businessmen late at night in phone booths? Well, he thought about going back to the last one. Not for the money. Oh, no. It wouldn't have been enough on its own for rent anyways. He just liked the company, but he figured having a partner made the hotline job tacky. Maybe. He never actually asked Fungingi how they felt about it. Maybe they thought their little space melon being a total harlot was the hottest thing in the world. He didn't know. He didn't care. Randy pondered if getting your boyfriend devastatingly high right before his surprise birthday party was an offense worth breaking up over. Did he have a choice? Disregarding the fact he wasn't worthy of love for a moment, Kiki knew way too much about him at this point. Realistically, his only options were to stay with them forever and risk being trapped in a loveless marriage, or no. Not entertaining that thought. Kinky was just a simple pond creature, a lovable little scamp. They knew not what they did or whatever. Then, what now? Randy Jade knew he was living on borrowed time, with no clue how to spend it. A loud sigh reverberated through the dumpster, echoing off walls, greeted only by his own solitude. He could donate his life savings of $2.15 to charity, though that would require withdrawing that money from the bank, which would mean seeing Karen, which was not an option. Perhaps he'd finally move on from the hotline to some shitty online camming service, make a few extra bucks, spend it all on coke and hookers, and kill himself before the law got to him. The idea was tempting, but unrealistic. Nobody wanted to see his sad, wrinkly balls, let alone pay to witness them. Plus, he didn't have a laptop or cam setup, so even if total weirdos online wanted to peek at his decrepit little hole, it just wasn't possible. Maybe he could open up a credit card and die before the debt became his problem? Ugh, this was stupid. Randy spent most of his 20s yearning for the sweet embrace of death, never expecting it to answer. Shouldn't he have been happy? He supposed if he wanted to, he could have ended things whenever he felt like it. He'd certainly thought about it before. Fingertips gently brushed the Band-Aid on his forehead. For a moment, it was easy to pretend the hand belonged to someone else. The city stood still. There was no sound of traffic, no loud chatter from the nearby restaurant. Like the world had nothing better to do than stare at him. He supposed he had an easy out baked into his forehead. Dangerously, his nails curled against the tape, and he held in a tight breath. Everything would be over right then and there. It would be easy. Another sigh as his hand flopped unceremoniously down to the trash. No, not yet. Maybe later. Suddenly, there was a loud, loud knock at the lid. Probably Fungingi, back for another riveting day of hijinks. Great. Fungingi, babe, I'm really tired, and I'm still mad about yesterday, and oh my god! Peering inside the dumpster was decidedly not Randy's beautiful green lover. The man scowled, comically large wineglass in hand. He looked down at Randy like a disgusting fat cockroach he'd accidentally stepped on, staining the bottom of his dress shoes with his mucilaginous insides. Oh, hello, sir, the Nokia mumbled, subconsciously retreating further into the corner of the dumpster. Randy, Bonnie replied curtly. Randy could have sworn rent usually came later in the month. Did he push it earlier in the month because he knew Randy was set to die soon? Was it a petty attempt to ruin Randy's birthday? Did God hate him personally? The dial of the man's antique phone head bore into Randy like a big, disgusting, ghastly eye. Mr. Bunny, the Burger Man, one of many people who'd ruined what pitiable scraps remained of Randy's life. If there was anyone to kill, Randy thought, numb, grounded only by the wet dumpster grease on his fingers, a potential murder so pathetic, so soaked in filth and muck and slime, that it wasn't worth pursuing at all. Also, murder was bad, and a crime, and this guy had a family, a business. Phone God, did he have a business? Randy convulsed just thinking about it. Unseasoned fries in a shabby karaoke booth. How his dumpster landlord with his stupid, oversized, plastic, empty wine glass looked down on him, literally, when, damn it, which one of them was really the leech, huh? All he had in compensation was, again, $2.15. $2.15 he was intending on spending in some horribly symbolic final gesture, or on hookers, or something, not on this stingy sleaze bag. Piercing a trash bag, out oozed an acrid smell, one that made Randy scrabble to his feet like a rabid dog, and perhaps just as pitiful. Look, I know. He clasped his bandaged hands together, the blood spotting them now a crusted black, filthy as the rest of them. I know. I'll get you the money. I've just been in a really tight spot lately. My partner drugged me in an Olive Garden. It was my birthday yesterday. I was a little birthday boy, and manicured fingernails scraped the dumpster's lid, and its owner cringed inward. It's always some shit with you, isn't it? I know, I know, Randy wheezed, clamoring, but I don't have much to my name right now. I mean, fucking look at me, right? Self-derisively, he swept an arm around the length of the dumpster, then gestured to himself. That Randy Jade standard denim jacket coated in slime as always, the jacket he'd worn to the funeral lost somewhere in the heaps of trash. Phone head cracked, chipped, no doubt smelling like aforementioned shit. His fingers bunched against his collar, catching on thin layers of grime, and God only knew what his nails must have looked like. Randy Jade kicked himself in as much as those around him did, but there was no catharsis in even this. Nothing to be gained in prostrating himself for the man who only saw him as a meager pocket to wring dry. Of all $2.15. Charging rent for a dumpster, scraping at him for every last penny, all for the right to sling trash at his face, day after day. Rotten fucking burgers and unseasoned fries, toilet paper and the crud off of grease traps. You're insane. Randy's fingers trembled, words he was always too cowardly to push out, to risk losing the only home that stood between him and the streets, but words he thought all the same. You work at burger restaurant, and own a burger restaurant. You've never experienced the real world, have you? That's how we end up with overgrown children like you, isn't it? You and everyone else. I'm looking at you. Bunny drawled, tipping up his wine glass. Even that glass was worth more than Randy's entire life savings. You know how tired everyone is of your... He waved a flippant hand. Little games, Randall. It's Randall with one L, actually. Your sob stories. Bunny raised the glass to his lips, sipping from absolutely nothing. Frankly, you're lucky I didn't have you arrested for all the times you shambled into my restaurant like a goddamn cryptid. He tapped the dumpster. This is the bare minimum of shit I, or anyone else, is willing to do for you, Randy. You contribute nothing to society. Shut up. Like you do either? Randy pawed for something, anything in the trash, but found none. No crisp dollar bill to get him out of this mess. No magic wand he could wave and earn the man's mercy. My dumpster's covered in... Randy swallowed. There was a lot the dumpster was covered in, actually. Flyers for your shitty place. A single, trash-covered finger was jabbed towards Bunny, the centerpiece of where it had all went wrong for Randall Jade. Or, well, one of the centerpieces anyway. There were a lot of them. But the point was, this one was right here. The reason he was living in a fucking dumpster, having to pay rent for a fucking burger place dumpster? Shitty? Bunny echoed, offering Randy's pitiful resistance nothing more than a cartoon villain landlord laugh. He was probably fantasizing about crushing Randy's dumpster and putting in a fucking oil factory or something, Randy thought. The man gestured out with his wine glass. Look at yourself, pal. Bunny's Burgers are the hottest burgers in downtown Dialtown. You know how much this suit jacket costs? Restoration and repairs for my phone head? I've scrounged up all the moolah for a reason, bucko. My customers are paying. People love me. Randy could just sense the non-existent evil smirk on Bunny's non-existent evil face, leaving unspoken in the air as he leered over the dumpster. And who loves you, Randy Jade? What gives you purpose? Cryptid eggs and phone sex hotlines? Don't make me laugh. Grime was touching his raw nail beds, liquid trash seeping into every pore. Sometimes it burned, the raw lacerations beneath the bandages going black with infection. He dared not to look at them. If Randy Jade didn't die from spontaneous head combustion, or choking on an Olive Garden pasta noodle, or getting sliced into ribbons by swans, or whatever comically cruel nonsense would befall him next, he'd die breathing the dumpster fumes, surely. Plastic, rotting food, roadkill and dry sewage, shattered computer parts, old moldy furniture, dens of cockroach eggs and wriggling larvae, dented pots and pans still clung to with the remnants of grease, uneaten bags of fries if he was really lucky, yard waste, upholstered furniture, bugs poking at the pus of his swan rash. All of it decorated the inside of Randy Jade's tomb. Your future is a forfeit. For try as he might have, his life wasn't going to get better. Not when his partner was a slimy cryptid and his landlord was a cartoon oil baron. Not when his home was a graffiti-ridden dumpster. Not when the sky he looked up to day after day was swarmed by flies and swans. You will die alone and miserable. He'd die in this heap of trash one day, that he always knew. But eyeing the smug look on Bunny's knot face, he realized how much the thought sickened him, how much dying out here would just make his tormentor clap his manicured, sterile, clean hands in glee, finally free of the cockroach that was Randy Jade. It felt like worms crawled against his skin just to weasel through the garbage, hands pumping in an effort to grasp at something, anything. A pane of glass. One it had hurt like fuck to sleep against. One that always lashed the cuffs of his pants when he got up to leave. One that served as nothing more than a maddening slice in his gut. Another reason Randy Jade would, in fact, die alone and miserable. His hands closed around it, breathing raggedly, heaving static, and up there, Bunny of Bunny's Burgers was looking down at him like just another piece of trash, a scurrying rodent living and dying in the dumpster's walls. So to be clear, I'm not leaving till you pay your... Go fuck yourself! Randy snarled, scrambling up the trash pile and oil floors in a manner that would have made Funkinky swoon, hands digging into the muck, knees squelching against a discarded banana peel, one shoe slipping off to be forever lost in the abyss of garbage, the coffin Randy could never truly crawl out of, but he'd take down everyone who'd driven a nail into its lid down with him. Crawling like a rabid dog, a shard of glass ball in his fist like a toddler with a crayon, he blindly swung at Bunny, perhaps too concerned with getting Randy's paw all over him to react. It hadn't snapped, but the wire dangling off his temple gouged apart. Phone slung off its hook as Randy babbled curses like a bloodthirsty toddler, spitting from his non-existent mouth like rabid foam or haphazard words something to the effect of, "Live and die for your burgers, you soulless piece of shit!" Or perhaps, "I hope there's a Bunny's Burgers in hell!" Grappling with blood, grease, and trash guns slicking his hands, the friction of Randy's battered band-aids were enough to seize grip on either side of the man's head. The torn telephone wire had rendered what may have been pleas for mercy, or perhaps, "Wow, even you kill like a loser," nothing more than staticky gargles. Distantly, Randy remembered a film in his history class in 4th grade about Callum Crown, as he writhed with Bunny's flailing form enough to drag him, kicking out and gasping in mute whirls, wine glass long gone, rolling to the ground, confirming it was indeed plastic, into the dumpster. Pointed, well-kept nails dug themselves into whatever exposed bits of skin they could find on Randy's body, desperately clawing at pale, bandaged hands with the strength of a displeased house cat, trying in vain to pull them off his head. Randy had to wonder if this was seriously his best attempt at fighting back, or if a few whacks to the head was all it took to reduce him to this, a dying, cornered animal stripped of everything but the most rudimentary survival instincts. Now there was a thought that sent an electric shiver down his spine. He managed to pin Bunny to the dumpster floor, adrenaline pumping too fast in his veins to stop and worry about the possibility of being too light to keep him there. Indeed, if Bunny weren't panicking, it wouldn't have been hard to simply push the Nokia off him, maybe slap him around some before dialing 911 and having him shipped off to prison. Or perhaps a mental institution would have been more fitting. Either way, Randy wouldn't be anyone's problem after that. Nobody would wonder where he went, nobody would visit, nobody would mourn, nobody would offer their sympathy, their pity, nothing. Mindlessly, he pressed his hands harder against Bunny's head, squeezing until the tips of his fingers turned white. He pressed harder and harder still. No dice. The sturdy oak making up the base of the old, antique wall phone was far too sturdy for Randy's liking. There wasn't anything he could do to cave his old boss's brains in. Not like that, anyways. Fine, then. Randy had little time to recuperate and think of a plan B. His grip faltered, giving way to a relieved, staticky exhale. That wouldn't do. But he had little time to celebrate the minor relief before his head was dragged up as high as Randy could pull it, twisting his neck at an unnatural angle. "Come on, Randy. That's enough. He's learned his lesson. Don't do this, please. You've done enough. You'll kill him if you don't stop. You're going too far. You're already in trouble. This isn't you. Stop it. Stop. Stop." Before he bashed his head against the squalid dumpster floor, watching it splinter on itself with unrestrained, childlike glee. If life had taught Randy Jade anything, it's that human beings were easy to break. One day your life could be perfectly normal. The next your brains are splattered all over the dirt somewhere with no one around who cares. "That's life, kid," they'll tell you. Life wants to make you its bitch. It instills fear into your heart so it can humiliate you however it sees fit. The first time Bunny's head hit the floor, he let out a loud and mechanical scream. A noise so undignified, even compared to his earlier cries of pain, Randy wasn't sure he actually even heard it. Naturally, he decided he wanted to hear it again, just to double check. And, sure enough, upon grabbing what was left of the telephone's cracked wooden casing, another haggard screech filled the air. It was so high-pitched, Randy didn't even think of the possibility of alerting some poor restaurant passerbys. Surely noises like that could only be heard by dogs. Nobody would ever think of it as a human cry for help. Bunny cried out, the metal dial in the center of his face scraping against the broken edge of a recently discarded kitchen blender. Randy chuckled. He hadn't even realized it was there. The man's unintelligible wailing grew muffled, as if it had been coming from underwater, though Randy couldn't figure out why until he felt something warm coating his fingers. He looked down, his assault halting for a brief moment, unable to tell what he was looking at. A pinkish, viscous foam trickled out from one of the splintered divots left in his skull. Randy watched in awe as his former boss choked on his own bloody saliva. He didn't know if he found the sight nauseating or if the off-white spittle pouring down his chin, stark against the bright red of his blood, was the most rewarding thing he'd ever seen. He supposed it didn't matter. Randy paid no mind to Buddy's frantic kicking, nor the frenzied clawing of his hands. It was little more than the dying twitches of a rabid animal. Something so pathetic it was better for your health and safety to just ignore it. Life will push you to your knees and watch you grovel. It'll enjoy watching you blubber and sob your guts out. It'll laugh and take pictures. It'll bash your skull, break your bones, steal your house, your friends, your dignity, until you have nothing left before it takes that too. Why? Randy had pondered that question many, many times. Maybe it's random, an impersonal rolling of the dice. Some people are lucky, some people aren't. As simple as that. Maybe it's just funny watching people suffer. Maybe it's all some kind of sick game you have to strategize for, and Randy had just fallen behind. He didn't know. He didn't think he ever would. All he knew was how good it felt beating pieces of human garbage like him into the dirt over and 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 over. Bunny had stopped struggling at some point. Clammy hands, now covered in filth, fallen to his sides, unmoving. Randy nearly mistook him as already dead, before a low groan made its way to his ears. A pained, garbled death rattle managed to escape what little bits of wire were still attached to his neck. The man had nothing left that could be described as a head. In its place, chunks of wet, red wood littered the dumpster, mixing in naturally with the piles of trash, like he had always been there. He rattled and gargled unintelligible nothings, and his chest, despite everything, continued to rise and fall, even if slowly. Randy could only sit and watch in his exhaustion, having beaten the man so hard he couldn't think of anything else to do. Even if he could, his body simply wouldn't move anymore. So he just sat there, listening to labored breathing the way one might listen to the morning birds outside, breathing in and out, and in and out, and in and out. Each labored push of his chest raspier than the last, until there wasn't anything left. It wasn't until then Randy felt the ache that had been building in his hands. He made an attempt to relax them, pulling them away from what was left of Bunny's head, flexing and unflexing tense fingers. Bits of wood had splintered their way into his skin, likely lodged in too far to pull out with tweezers. Great. More stuff that could get infected. As if his hands weren't fucked enough. The prospect of an afternoon spent pulling the shrapnel out would have annoyed him had the thought not felt so far away. As it was now, no matter how much they stung, Randy did not recognize the bruised purple hands hanging loosely off the ends of his wrists as his own. For a while he just sat there, like he expected the carcass to shoot back upright, reanimated like a zombie or a Frankenstein. Of course, no such moment came. The only movement from the man's body came from Randy timidly poking it with a discarded stick, as if it had become too filthy to touch with bare hands. Though that was in part due to the dumpster's maggot population finding Randy's guest to be utterly irresistible, inching towards him mere moments after death. Like he's already gone rotten, Randy thought, watching the maggots with an almost unpleasant curiosity. The same way a kid playing outside might stop to watch an ant mound. He carefully observed the scatterings of hard wood, and how strange it looked soaking up blood, despite it all coming from the same source. Not for the first time his own head felt unnatural attached to his shoulders in a way he couldn't describe. After a while lost in thought, he stood up on wobbling legs, dusting off whatever scraps of wood he could, avoiding eye contact with the dirty thing laying at the bottom of his dumpster. That morning had likely been completely average for it. It got up, got dressed, maybe it made breakfast, maybe it picked it up from a coffee place on the way to work, and got ready for an uneventful burger-filled day, the same as any other. Then it died. No foreshadowing, no build-up, nothing anyone but Randy could have predicted. That's just how tragedies worked, he supposed. One day everything's great, next day your head's battered into a million unsalvageable pieces, and your dead body's left to rot in a pile of unremarkable filth. That's life. That's why Randy didn't feel the least bit guilty. After all, if he wasn't here, then surely he'd be on the receiving end, his own head smashed into a familiar pile of plastic and wires. No fanfare, no dying bucket list, no last words. A shaky sigh. Way to go, Randy. Now you have another mess to deal with. So when did you become so violent and thirsty for blood? He waved the obnoxious voice in his head away. Whatever. Landlords hardly count as people anyways. Still, they didn't solve the issue of another dead body on his floor, and he doubted he could wrangle Gingy into helping him cut up another guy and shove him into some bags. Shit. Before anything else, Randy decided if he's a murderer, trademark, now, then most other crimes are on the table too. A momentary glee washed over him. He bent down and fished Bunny's wallet out from his pocket, finding at least 200 smackaroos in there, which was more money than Randy Jade would see at once in his life otherwise. He could get used to this. Maybe his newfound life of sin and debauchery, no matter how short it would realistically be, wasn't so bad after all. In the crustiest corner of Downtown City Park, a cryptid squatted. Phone Gigi was doing as Phone Gigi did, crouching on the ground and slurping at a puddle of dubious make, frightening passerby, chasing squirrels, trying to force their four limbs to locomote in the way a propeller could. The usual. On their end, they were oblivious. Blissfully so, even. The line between their stupidity being aggravating and charming was quite the blurry one to ride, but compared to Randy, they were trouncing about like a kid in a candy store. "Hey, narrator," they asked, in the midst of devouring an aluminum can. "What's with the ominous Randy reference?" "Huh? Nothing. Must have been the wind." "Okay." Gleefully, expired soda dripping down their horrible maw, they plopped back down, vestigial tail prodding at some leftover street ooze. Life was, well, not perfect, but simple. They had their eggs, they had their Randy, they had assorted other pals and chums, who they shared fond Olive Garden memories with, and they even, blink and you'll miss it, had one sock they found on the ground the other day, which is pretty awesome as far as their little fish brain was concerned. Simplicity was fine. In fact, the narrator was probably pleased to see them causing normal amounts of victimless mischief, for once, long tired of hearing about the creature they were unfortunately tethered to's cruel hijinks, or worse, dating life. But still, then, in that little fish brain, something was off, and they could smell it in the air, which, given the usual stench they exuded, meant something was really off. What was Randy up to right about now, anyway? Suddenly, their phone heads started ringing in a plot-relevant manner. Hello? Hey, hun. How are you? The caller responded, cheerfully slurring their words. It took Gingy a moment to realize who they were talking to. The voice was familiar, and of course that tropical, cheap holiday vibe character theme that had started playing, but something was clearly off. Could it be Randy? Randy giggled like a tween-age girl at a sleepover on the other end. Kiki sat there slack-jawed. Randy never sounded this happy, especially not over the phone. Phone calls with Randy usually contained far more crying and bad turdy talk ripped straight out of an ASMR SoundCloud amateur hour. They hummed, mindlessly playing with a lone dandelion they found in the grass, twisting its green stem in a series of knots. Are you sure you're Randy? 'Cause my Randy never sounds this happy unless they're having free sample day in the bakery section of Walmart. Another obnoxious giggle. Kiki swore they could catch the splashing of water on the other end. Another sign that Randy should have been crying and screaming and throwing up. Randy hated playing in the water. They've never seen him happily splish or even splash. It's me, I swear. Already here's just in a real great mood. They nodded their heads, suspicious. Uh-huh. But look, I was wondering if I could mosey on over to your tent tomorrow, spend the day with my darling Peach Bellini? Randy asked. And just like that, any reservations Fungeeky had flew out of their little noggin like a McDonald's napkin on the freeway. They'd never been anyone's darling Peach Bellini before. Oh, baby! Sure thing, you sexy beast, you! Their tail nub wagged excitedly, accidentally swatting a few of the tiny flowers that had managed to grow in the park's hazardous soil. Great! See you then! Love you! Bye! And just like that, the call was over as quickly as it started. Huh. Huh, what? Kiki responded to the nagging voice in their head. We both agree that was weird, right? The narrator asked. Kiki shrugged. Whatever. I'm sure he's happy about something reasonable and is being completely well-adjusted about it, they said assuredly before going back to their dandelion, gently licking off a few ants they noticed crawling on it like a timid baby anteater. A long, worried sigh filled the park's air. I hope you're right. Alone in an unremarkable two-story, three-bedroom house on the outskirts of town, Randy Jade was having the time of his fucking life. His leg, freshly shaven and baby smooth, breached from the bathtub, pointed at the bathroom ceiling like a beautiful humpback whale emerging to breathe God's glorious air. He doused the tub in a disgusting amount of bubble bath sauce and Epsom salt. An empty bottle of Stella Rosa Golden Honey Peach had been haphazardly discarded on the floor somewhere, forever doomed to collect dust in a corner where Randy wouldn't care enough to find it. His only regret was not bringing out 2 bottles instead. When Randy followed the address in Buddy's wallet, he didn't know what he was expecting. Perhaps to be shooed out by the man's hypothetical wife and kids, or accosted by any concerned neighbors. But nothing happened. He easily found the house key under the mat, and opened the door to find a house completely empty. No pets, and nothing to suggest any current or past loves. No kids, no family pictures, nothing. The miserable lout was just as lonely and pathetic as Randy, except Randy had a totally awesome green lover and also wasn't fucking dead. So ha! He kicked his stupid little feetsies. Can you believe he ever used to believe in such stupid things as luck and curses? The problem was him the whole time. To think all he had to do was imply himself, take action. Phone God, it was so rewarding. He knew he'd regret it all in the morning. The police would find him, look at the body left to rot in the dumpster, the DNA evidence Randy was kicking the house in, the lack of any alibi whatsoever, and his obvious motive, and put him on death row or something stupid like that. And he'd hide out in Gingy's tent, bitch and moan about how sad he was. Mayor Mingus probably had all the goons Randy didn't murder yet hot on his trail, waiting for the proper opportunity to swat him. But for one glorious afternoon, he was on top of the world. If he was gonna die soon anyways, he might as well enjoy it, right? Randy watched in disgusted awe as the bathwater turned a horrible brown. Had it really been that long since he had a shower that wasn't the pond? Now there was an idea. Maybe tomorrow he'd wrangle Fungi into helping him turn Bunny into swan food. Maybe then the ever-ravenous pondfowl would stop trying to swallow him like deviant boa constrictors. He chortled at the thought. As Randy splashed around in his putrid bath, his eyes glazed over the various soaps and body scrubs lining the tub shelves. Even in his bout of manic glee, the abundance annoyed him. He locked in on 2 big bottles of body wash, one labeled Nourishing Silk, the other Deeply Nourishing. You couldn't pay Randy to so much as guess the difference between the 2 scents at gunpoint. An annoyed laugh rumbled from his chest. Without looking, he grabbed one of the bottles, popping open the lid. He couldn't be sure which of the 2 it was. He didn't care enough to check. He poured it unceremoniously into the bath, then the other one, then a pink bottle, then purple, then blue, then orange. It didn't matter what they were for or what scent they were. Randy just knew they all costed lots of money. Money stolen from poor schmucks like him. So really, even if Randy hadn't killed the guy, all the shit in his house was his to do whatever with. He'd pour as much novelty body wash down the drain as he damn well pleased. It was his after all. Eventually, Randy grew bored of his soap desecration. He drunkenly rose to his feet, that bath's bubbles still clinging to him, steadying his gait on the bathroom's cold, sterile wall. The bathroom mirror had fogged over, protecting Randy from the sight of his naked reflection, something he appreciated. He saw more than enough of his pale, bruised skin in the bath than he ever wanted to, noticing far more scratches on his arms than usual. Bunny must have done all of that. Most of it, anyway. Randy recalled the feeling of manicured nails scratching into him, though the memory already felt distant. The guy was kicking and scratching like, well, Randy supposed his life did quite literally depend on it. He laughed to himself, noticing for the first time how doing so hurt his ribs. Lame. He couldn't be sure if Bunny had managed to sock him there, or if he'd bruised them from laughing so much on the phone earlier. Randy's actual clothes were still in the wash, though he wasn't sure how much it would help. It was all soaked in the same unmistakable shade of red. How he managed to walk over here without anyone rightfully calling the police was beyond him. Actually, most residents of Dialtown probably just assumed he had had a particularly nasty run-in with a gaggle of swans earlier. And they were right to. If Randy saw himself walking down the street drenched in blood, that'd be his immediate thought. He shook his head and nabbed a soft-looking bathrobe off the towel rack. He didn't feel like thinking about the police anymore. This was supposed to be his last day of fun before he went to jail and was executed like Phone Martha Stewart back in 2004 or something. He should be happy. He was happy. Ugh, God. This loser's lame-ass white bread house was getting to him. He thought about calling Fongingi again. There wasn't anything in particular he wanted to talk about. Just knowing they were on the other end of the line, words reverberating in the back of his skull, was enough. Randy hated being alone in big open spaces. Made him feel even more like a nervous prey animal than usual. He shook his head. Ignoring the fact it was already an ungodly time of night, he'd already be seeing Fongingi tomorrow. What was a few more hours? Still, the post-first bath in months clarity left an aching, lonely pit in his stomach. Ugh, since when was he this weird and clingy? With that, Randy decided he was not drunk enough anymore, and began his quest to sniff out a second bottle of Stella Rosa Golden Honey Peach. And if that didn't work, he knew there was a bottle of vodka on the counter next to Bunny's novelty boss-ass bitch chalice. Yeah, Yeah, the night was still young. So what if it was already past 2 in the morning? And so what if Randy was spending his last day alive, naked, getting drunk at what was essentially a stranger's house? Who fucking cared? Not Randy. All he cared about was his honey peach and seeing if Property Brothers was still on Hulu. Man, did those brothers know their property! So Randy J didn't feel nauseous as he crawled into a stranger's bed. The glow of the TV didn't hurt his head. He didn't keep getting up to double, triple, quadruple check that the door was locked, because it didn't matter, remember? He didn't care. He didn't think about the way Bunny looked as he killed him. It didn't feel good. He didn't like doing it. It wasn't funny. He wasn't a murderer. It didn't count. He wasn't happy about it, nor was he sad. He was... Well, how was Randy Jade supposed to feel in times like these? He was wasting his time being sad. He was a monster if he was happy. He snuggled further into the comforter, indulging in the feeling of an actual blanket. It was almost nice if he pretended it belonged to someone else. He remembered sleeping in an actual bed at his dad's place as a teenager, never realizing back then that something as simple as that wouldn't last forever. It was weird, thinking back on his childhood home. He wasn't often nostalgic for it. Most memories still intact from back then were mildly awkward at best and stuff he'd really rather forget at worst. Though, all things considered, a lot of it wasn't nearly as bad as he remembered. Not anymore, at least. He thought about calling his dad, or maybe his brothers, just to have someone to say goodbye to. Nah, it'd be scummy to drag them into whatever this is last minute. They were tired of him, of his weird little sob stories, tired of his lack of career, tired with the everything about him, no doubt. There wasn't much to be accomplished in contacting them. So Randy closed his eyes and did his best not to think of anything whatsoever. Chapter 5. Wait and See. The Mingling were, as the great mayor of Dollartown herself would put it, in a royal goddamn pickle. You see, Minkus's goons were really fond of dying lately. That in and of itself wasn't a problem, as the contracts they signed rendered their bodies all legal possessions of the mayor's, akin to her scratching post and meticulously oil-painted self-portraits. And to be honest, she was imagining they'd go out under some murder-suicide, government-building bombing, adjacent manner at some point. That, however, was in her hands. This wasn't. And there was nothing worse for the great mayor of Dialtown herself than uncertainty. Every strand of fur atop her head had its meticulous place, every piece of furniture maintained by horrendously unpaid civilians, every word out of her mouth carefully chosen from the finest thesauruses Pawpaw kept around. And she liked it that way, damn it! What the hell was this? Was she to be outmatched, nay, outsmarted, by little Billy of all people? That little fucker probably knew the killer's identity as they spoke, and had been paid off with nothing more than a pocket sum of Gerber's Puffs coated in pulverized menthol, the embryonic shitlord. If nothing else, the others seemed as clueless as her, up to and including God himself. That probably owed to her cutting education across the board last year, and the fact that Dollartown's police system consisted of what was best compared to a flock of heavily armed tumbleweeds. But having someone else to watch aimlessly flounder in fear gave her some shots of dopamine all the same. Of course, the aimless floundering in fear also owed to the live anteater that Theodore brought in, claiming it would help with the investigation somehow. Presently, its pencil-sharpener muzzle was munching on the sleeve of an unbothered god, whom Minkus was really beginning to regret letting in Phil for Bunny. But he was her only real option, almost like it was destined to happen, in a horrible way. "Do we have," Downtown's mayor began, head in her hands, "any actual leads? I feel like it's all been downhill ever since we lost..." Idly, she snapped her fingers, trying to remember the name of the first deceased. It didn't help that his brother, lover, whatever, insisted on keeping the nameplate up, which would have been a nice gesture to anyone with a heart made of slightly less black Arctic ice than Miss Minga's crown. "Stubby!" she surmised, with enough confidence that nobody called her out on it. Or perhaps they didn't remember either. The Molly huffed. All we've got in Bunny's case is a mutilated phone head and a vacancy at his burger place, and the talent show they're running to find a new boss isn't exactly helping in any investigations. She splayed out a hand and gesture. And don't mistake my irritation for genuine concern if the same should happen to any of you. You're all endlessly disposable. Except you, little Billy, as much as I wish you were. The little scamp gave her a pair of finger guns, and she knew, just looking at him, that the sentiment wasn't mutual. He could drop her for the next evil mastermind he bumped into any day. In the sea of indistinct muttering, alongside the irritating whir of a pencil sharpener, there raised the hand of Abel Brannigan, who she and everyone else frequently forgot the presence of. The closest thing to mingling straight man, which, given the number of carnival ride-induced casualties and novelty fare sandwiches with illegal traces of lead in them he had under his belt, was saying something. Yes? Mingus drawled. Well, Abel adjusted his collar. We do have one lead. What's his name? He gave the tabletop a few taps, hoping that thought would come to him faster. Fuckface! That guy! Mingus's ears immediately flattened. You don't mean... Abel nodded. Buddy was always complaining about the guy on phone book, whether anyone actually wanted to hear about it or not, he muttered. Said he never paid his rent on time, and that customers got really uncomfortable whenever he came inside the building begging for change or spare napkins or whatever. Little Billy snickered from his seat, his stubby legs perched up on the table in his display of youthful mischief. I remember the video of that bozo getting shooed out of the burger place with a broom. Wish I could have been there. Looked fucking hilarious. As I recall, you couldn't attend your school's annual burger day because you were in juvie for attempting to shove a hot dog down the pants of the ambassador of France, the mayor recalled, visibly annoyed. It was not fun having to bail him out of that mess, regardless of how funny it may or may not have been. Look at it this way. At least I wasn't a firecracker. Billy shrugged. He spoke in a manner that made it clear to everyone else in the room that if he could shove a firecracker up a Frenchman's rectum, he absolutely would. All Mingus could give was a long, drawn-out exhale. Yes, and I'm sure that took tremendous restraint. But I fail to see how any of this has to do with the matter at hand. Her pointed claw tapped impatiently against the wood of the podium. It's simple. You have a landlord you hate, and your life's already at rock bottom, so why not bash his brains in while you've got nothing to lose? That's what I would do, at least, Abel replied, assuring his own detective work. A confused murmur filled over the room, before the gun-headed one raised his head, having been looking sadly at the now empty seat. Now that you mention it, Bro was always talking about a hot piece of ass that worked at the hotline. Randy, I think his name was, said he got real pissy when robbed of his $1.55. He stopped for a moment in horrified concentration. You don't think he... Mingus hissed in complete and utter agony, as if someone had gruesomely murdered her entire family right in front of her. She shook her head furiously. No! First of all, never call Randall Jade a hot piece of ass in my presence ever again, unless you want your head to take a permanent vacation from your body. The room hushed into terrified agreement, to which she took a deep breath and composed herself. Second, do you honestly think someone like him is capable of the kind of crimes we're dealing with here? Little Billy, face of all downtown's crime, far more so than the gun-headed widower only child sitting across from him, raised its hand in flippant disapproval. Oh, heck no! It would take the bloodthirst of a wild beast to do what had been done upon poor Shooty's head. Theodore spoke. fondly caressing the back of his anteater like the tween protagonist of a horse movie. The gun-headed one raised his hand, then seemed to realize how little further words anyone wished to hear out of the zookeeper's mouth, and promptly put it back down. "In terms of my greatest creations," God murmured, looking to have arrived to the meeting dully intoxicated, "Randy isn't." There came a cheeky, waffled smile upon the dog's screen. "That poor lech could hardly open a pickle jar, much less bash someone's noggin in." The tip of his nose twitched. "Twice? Like once? If we assume there's some event akin to Jupiter barreling into the sun, I could see it happening." Minkus cringed at the smear of wet pencil shavings that adorned the hobo's screen when he wiped at his face. "Twice? That's more like if we woke up tomorrow and found one of Theodore's Mingos had given birth to a cow." The zookeeper in question brightened, eager to accost more ears. "Fascinating story about the Mingos!" "No," Mingus snapped. "I swear on my papa's as-of-yet unfilled grave that if any of you forced me to think about Randall Jade for any longer than I absolutely have to, I will blow this building to smithereens and inject the arsenic from my oil paintings into your bloodstreams, and every last one of you will die screaming. What happened to Bunny will look like a carnival." "Lamau," articulated Billy. "Yes, ma'am," chirped Abel. No one had anything to add after that. The room fell into a hush, save for the occasional bellowing of the anteater, which was horrifying to listen to, and everyone hated. Suddenly, the room's carpet and various wall paintings became the most interesting thing in the world, far more pleasant to look at than Mayor Mingus, who was about 5 seconds away from developing a rage-induced cat ulcer. It didn't make sense. Anyone capable of that kind of violence should have been in this room already. Surely the dumb, lovable schmucks of Dialtown wouldn't just do this willy-nilly. There had to be something she was missing. Her eyes darted across the room, scanning her patrons for anything suspicious. Shooting could be ruled out immediately. Everyone knew murder was not something anyone in the Dialtown mob was actually capable of, let alone the murder of his ambiguous life partner. If something had snapped behind the man's eyes, well, she would have noticed it by now. Entertaining the idea wasn't worth her time. The same could be said of God, who was somehow even less capable of violence, and also not an actual member of the Mingling. For a moment she considered the possibility of him getting rid of Bunny for a seat in the council, but even she knew her group of villainous fiends was definitely not worth killing someone. Not to mention the fact God would never exert that kind of effort for literally anything. Theodore definitely could kill a man, but he wasn't really the back-alley beating type. If Theodore Russellbelt killed you, everyone else would know it immediately by the bullet hole in your forehead and the tapirs sniffing your lifeless dead body. Abel was not capable of killing a man, despite his claims otherwise. Any blood in his hands was a result of gross, funfair negligence, rather than cold-blooded murder. Perhaps the one who was most likely to murder Bunny in cold blood, but more in the vein of a cyanide-laced wine glass, or a suicide pact looking over the ocean, or something equally pretentious and homoerotic. Maybe he was just pissed that someone had kill-stole him, a lamentation Mingus would offer no financial or emotional compensation for. "You snooze, you lose," her valiant papa once said. That made little Billy, who was, of course, the most likely culprit out of anyone here. But Mingus knew it couldn't have been him. If he had done it, the scenes would have been infinitely more gruesome and disturbing. She'd seen some of his handiwork before, and it wasn't pretty, the most notable being 9/11-2, the quadruplet towers. She shuddered just thinking about it. Phone God knows what would have happened had she not nipped that plan in the bud. "So that's it, then?" The mayor rubbed a gloved hand against her temple. "Not a single one of you has any actual lead?" "Hey, how do we know you didn't do it, buzzo?" Billy replied, spinning one of his mini vapes like some kind of horrible tech deck. Mingus swore no matter how many of those rancid things she confiscated during meetings, he always seemed to spawn more from the ether. Normally she didn't care about the drug habits of children, but the smoke was bad for the gun-headed one's gun asthma. Because you vertically stunted Neanderthal, if I had to kill any of you for whatever reason, there wouldn't be a corpse left to bury. Her voice then softened. Not to mention that I had other endeavors planned for this week that are now on an indefinite hiatus because of all this mess. If I wanted any of you dead, I would have taken care of it last week. Would have been far less trouble. Shruti raised his sad, grief-stricken hand. I'm just glad us dying matters enough to you to put your plans on hold. Well, I'm not, the mayor hissed. Think of all the actually important things I could be contributing to Dialtown, to the world right now. She massaged the bridge of her nose with her fingers, soothed none by any amount of fluffy kitty fur. We had a jazz recital coming up, Shruti noted, voice full of heart, like that was in any way comparable. There's a sale on Phonorite skins I'm missing out on, Billy added. Billy, Mingus spoke, with the fondness of a mother about to throw her child in a burlap sack down the river. I could not care less about any single one of your childish gaming ventures. An ear-shattering sob erupted from the back of the room. Stabby, seemingly out of nowhere, started weeping, holding the end of his barrel in his hands to catch any stray gun tears. What? I'm sorry. It just... my bro, he used to love Phonorite Battle Royale. The gun-headed man wailed, blowing his nose into his sleeve in a display of grief most disgusting. Now, I'd advise you not to shout so much, lest the anteater grow displeased, Theodore interjected. Nobody else was sure if he was unaware of his own volume, or if he just assumed his zookeeper's bond with the Grasslandian beast made it different. Either way, this information was not comforting to Shruti in the slightest. All of you, stop talking right now! The mayor slammed her little kitty paws against her wooden podium, which definitely did not help with the anteater situation. I don't know if any of you airheaded half-wits understand the gravity of the situation we're in, but I assure you, it is of utmost importance to me that we get this issue dealt with as soon as humanly possible. The unspoken, because if this continues, it's going to look really bad on me once re-election season rolls around, was more or less universally understood. Before continuing, Mingus leaned down to grab one of her many putrid bottles of milky champagne she had to keep on hand at all times for mental health reasons. She sighed, pouring the liquid into one of her fancy flute-style glasses. Nobody else had anything to drink, but that was standard for mingling meetings. Once Abel had asked about having refreshments for everyone, and was promptly told to stand in the corner for the rest of the meeting like a toddler in timeout, or that guy in the ending scene of the Blair Witch Project. The Molly brought the drink to her lips, the sweet taste of carbonated dairy being the only thing that kept her sedated enough to not blow the entire building up. You know, there is one citizen, and I use that term extremely loosely, depraved and uncivilized enough to commit such heinous acts of unprecedented violence. Another sip. This whole ordeal has that emerald-hued puke stain written all over it. Fongingi? Gon asked, taking a break from inhaling his disgusting dog slop. Nah, can't be them. They were too busy enjoying ground beef day down at the burger hovel when the murder happened. Believe me, it was an all-day affair. I'm inclined to agree with the unkept dog beast. I have studied the green creature at great lengths, and its violent tendencies, while not non-existent, have never been so horrifically uncouth, Theodore added, though I do wish I could have seen its likely traumatizing and excessive consumption of ground beef. The dog on God's screen gave a look of pure terror. Trust me, you don't. I don't think I've heard that many adult men and women start openly weeping in public before. Okay, enough of that, Mingus interrupted with a hiss. I suppose if that green wretch has an alibi, then they're legally in the clear. For now. Though I really shouldn't be surprised. Our opponent is far too crafty and quick-witted to be that horrible pond leech. even if placing them on ultra-death row would make my life infinitely more bearable." She groaned, clearly twitching with fervor at the idea of that rancid green head rolling to her feet. But alas. "Whatever the case, I expect all of you to remain on high alert. Whatever we're dealing with here is not to be taken lightly. If any of you see anything even remotely suspicious, you will contact me immediately. Understood?" She banged her cane against the town hall floor like a judge banging his gavel, a symbol of her unwavering authority. "Our opponent is far too dangerous to let your guard down for even a moment." Cramped in a small, damp tent in the park, Randy Jade found himself weeping once again, crying and throwing up into his lover's trusty frog pot, shoulders shaking with each and every heave. "Oh, God, Gigi, I can't keep doing this." Like a little snake, Fungigi's horrid tongue poked out thoughtfully for half a second. Yup, that sure was Randy, exuding fluid from every orifice he could, at every chance he could, the sadder and more pathetic the better. This batch of fluid, however, seemed even sadder and more pathetic than the last, which didn't make Gengi very happy. "Doing what?" they asked, like a good green lover would, thinking themselves comparable to some kind of housewife for an emotionally troubled husband who liked punching walls, though, in Randy's case, his knuckles would crumble far before any amount of wall substance could, or perhaps a female soapberry bug whose mate had latched upon her for 11 days to reduce potential male competition. Whatever it was, they were very romantic about it, dutifully stroking Randy's back with some manner of slimy appendage as he heaved. Finally he emerged, head trembling like it would pop. He smelled nefariously of alcohol, and, worse so, not only nourishing silk, but deeply nourishing body wash. Had Randy's horrible cracked skin finally meet a bottle of store-brand soap caused his brain to shut down? Oh, noes! But when he spoke, he showed no sign of that, only fumbling about his words for a second more before exhaling a low, grave breath. "Babe," he finally began, voice quaking. I..." Again he swallowed, shook his head. "I can't expect something like you to understand." Fingers reached upwards to cage the buttons paneling down his face. I shouldn't say anything. I shouldn't..." "I don't understand a lot of things," Gigi chirped, twitching for a moment as they remembered how to make a thumbs up. "I don't know shit about banks, or cinemas, or Bigfoots, but I still listen to the best capacity my whittle brain will allow, which isn't much. 'Tis a great miracle I even remember how to speak some days." Still, something was off. Their tail nub twitched, as Randy granted them not even the pathetic, sweaty affirmations they were used to hearing when they chatted up his extremely measly accomplishments. Darn, would they have to break out the pet names? "You'll be okay, my wubbly wump of sugar sex. I promise!" Gigi beamed, yet all that netted was a screech of pure agony. Okay, fine, God, I killed someone! Are you happy?" Randy screamed to the heavens, like aforementioned emotionally troubled husband and or male soapberry bug confessing to a torrid affair, complete with slamming a hand on a non-existent kitchen table. "Just never call me that again! You could use that to torture CIA prisoners, I swear to God!" Gigi blinked, eyelid by eyelid, seam by seam. This was, they were distantly aware, a step above Randy's usual levels of emotional distress. A meter they didn't even think could go up anymore. Their Randy Dandy, the winter candy apple to their peach Bellini, was angry, not at the world, but them, and at perhaps even himself, and at that point, Kiki had to start counting the things they knew you could be angry at on their fingers. "It was Buddy," Randy heaved, then seemed to remember Kiki wouldn't recall a name if it was stuck to their forehead, and began to mime swirling around a wine glass. "The fucking Burgers Man! I killed the Burgers Man!" "Burgers Man?" Genki trailed off, the gears in their weird, frog-adjacent brain turning with all their might before they finally perked up. "Oh, the Burgers Man!" The joy of realizing who exactly Randy was talking about was soon replaced with ass-clenching rage at the mere thought of him. That pompous, no-good, wine-guzzling cunt bag never lets me sniff at the glass. Can you believe that, Randy? Randy looked shocked, mostly because he did not realize Funkinky knew the word pompous or what it meant. But he nodded his incredibly sore head in agreement. Yeah, well, he's totally dead now and stuff. His bandaged hand gripped the de facto puke bowl tighter in preparation for more oncoming fluids. So you're saying... Randy shuddered as Ginky leaned in to inspect him closely, assessing the situation. Oh god, he's so fucked. He's so unbelievably fucked. Ginky's going to realize how unbelievably fucked up this whole situation is and dump him and call the cops and or the swans. Oh god, oh fuck! You're saying I can go over and sniff the glass whenever I want now? Ginky instead exclaimed, beaming like a child who'd just been told they get to go to Disney World or Freedomland, USA. I mean, if you can get past all the police tape and homicide detectives, then sure, I guess. Randy gave one of his signature thumbs-up Randy poses, but Ginky could tell his heart wasn't really in it. Oh, come on! You were so happy and full of whimsy last night. What happened to that, Randy? That Randy was incredibly drunk and high off the luxury of a bathtub owned by someone with moderate disposable income, he responded, downtrodden. Ginky cocked their head. No way! You got a bath out of this whole ordeal? The cryptid's torn-up tail stump began to wag unconsciously. No wonder you smell so good. Their long, slimy tongue darted out of its sheath again, wiggling like a snake sniffing the air for any tasty treats. Ginky? Before Randy had any time to react, he was pounced upon, mercifully pinned under his lover's weight. What are you... Said tongue darted its way across the Nokia screen, coating it in unspeakable juices. Hey, stop that! You're undoing hours of bath time! Of course, Funkinky cared not about his protests. Randy tried squirming and kicking his stupid little feetsies to get them off. No dice. Babe, I'm serious. I will throw up again. Come on, you eat gravel and roadkill and... He was interrupted by another lick to the head, like being accosted by the world's greenest puppy dog. Despite this, they both heard the smile in his voice peeking through. It was considerably difficult to be actually upset during government-mandated kiss time. This is what happens, Randy. The weak should fear the strong, Kiki announced proudly. Though their attack momentarily ceased, they still sat firmly on top of him, a monument of their absolute victory. Gross as they were, Randy was glad that Funkinky was still the same as ever. Even if Randy completely lost himself, even if he had nothing left, nothing would ever take his lime-hued lover away from him. So why are you sad again? They interrupted his train of thought. I thought you hated that guy. Isn't him being gone a good thing? He asked, looking down, refusing to stop sitting directly on top of their boyfriend, undoubtedly crushing his fragile, calcium-deprived bones. I do. Or, well, I did. It's... Randy had to think about it for a moment. Why was he upset? Did anybody actually like Bunny? Randy couldn't think of anyone off the top of his head. It's not that I feel bad about it. It's just laws and stuff. You know, when you kill people, you tend to go to jail and all. But you didn't go to jail for the first murder. Please don't remind me of my double homicide. So you're, like, doing okay, I think. If they knew it was you, they'd probably hunt you down by now. They hooked their fingers, letting out a snarl Randy was sure was meant to be playful, but instead sounded nothing short of guttural and disgusting. Randy Dandy so good at murderings and other things. With a monumental groan of effort, Randy sat up. I don't really, want to be, though, is the thing. He wrung his hands. You kill a guy once, that's a solid fuck-up, but it's whatever. If you live long enough, you could tell it to people at Thanksgiving as a really weird uncle and be golden. Hesitant, wobbly thumbs up. But twice? Separate guy, separate place? That's like... His shoulders slumped. Fucked. Kiki tilted their head. Is it? I don't remember the name of all the roadkill I eat, or every citizen I've frightened away from the park grounds, they shrugged. How Randy wished, just any part of him, that they would condemn him, and he'd start figuring his shit out again. But perhaps it was selfish to expect that much of something like Fongigi. Burger men like to die, they gave a nod of finality, and the first one was an accident or whatever, like manslaughter or something. Second one, the guy was a total bastard man. I'd be upset too. Randy tipped his head back, flopping back down to the floor of his lover's tent. Maybe it wasn't his place to look to Fongigi for moral guidance after all. But, all the same, they were more than a simple, stupid, slimy little creature. They were in love. For a long time, Randy never thought of such a thing possible for himself, as unattainable as, say, a career, talent, anything resembling luck or a happy life. But he'd gotten it. Maybe he couldn't dismiss their words. Maybe Fongigi, despite all their gunk, muck, and all brands of ooze, was purer than he could ever be. And if they thought he would be okay, then... No. If they thought he was justified, then... Randy exhaled a sigh, at long length, longer than it needed to be, all things considered, as the weight all tipped away. See? Now they weren't even thinking about it. Now their bare, bony body was busy tearing ass across the floor of their tent, chasing down a cockroach like it had somewhere to be. Randy could only laugh. Had he really thought Bunny's soulless, cheap, chintzy home to be the key to happiness? No, all of that was right here. Fongigi wouldn't say a thing. They didn't concern themselves with Dialtown citizens' horrid human concepts of money, business, morality. All they cared about were their eggs. And Randy. How he managed to find a spot in the cryptid's heart, he had no idea, but he felt no urge to get up and leave. Not till the police tore him away by force, anyway. Thanks, hun, he murmured, unsure if they heard him at all. There were cockroaches to devour, after all. Ignoring Gengi's various tent noises, it felt almost peaceful just sitting in the park and letting his mind wander. For all the time Randy was forced to spend out here, he never really took the time to savor it, for obvious pawn-avian-related reasons. Even through the tent, Randy could tell the air felt heavy, like at any moment a storm would start. Normally such a thought would fill him with dread. He never did like storms. As a little kid he'd always burst into tears at the mere implication of rain heavier than a sprinkle. But it felt different somehow. Maybe it was the fact he had company. Maybe he'd been through so much the past few days, trivial things like the weather didn't matter anymore. He couldn't be entirely sure. All Randy knew was that through his post-nausea jitters and the fear of his own impending death, he was starting to feel, maybe not happy, but content. He looked over to Genki, who was happily constructing the half-eaten cockroach corpses into a horrible human centipede-esque contraptions, though maybe the intention was to build more of a Subway subtype meal? Yeah, content. He could be fine with all of this. Slowly, Randy rose to his feet, careful to not make himself sick again. It was strange. Physically, he still felt like shit. A throbbing pain ran through his temple and down the back of his neck. He wasn't sure if it was because he was hungover or if he'd banged his head up even more in the dumpster yesterday, though he did his best to convince himself it was the former. It took Fongigi a moment to realize Randy had gotten up off the floor, too engrossed in their bug adventure. They looked up at him, confused. I just want to go on a little walk real quick before it starts raining. He awkwardly stood in the tent's opening before asking, Do you want to tag along? Get some fresh air? Kiki promptly laughed him off. Downtown's air is not fresh. It's like 80% smog. I think that's how numbers work anyways. I don't actually know. Randy just hummed in response. They were right, of course, but thinking about it too hard wasn't going to make his walk, trademark, any more relaxing. I'll be back in an hour, then. He turned around, getting only a few steps outside before turning on his heel, scrambling back to poke his head in. I love you. Huh? They whipped their head around, surprised he turned back around just to say that. Love you too. Please at least try not to get your head bitten off by swans or any other manner of beast. That would be super embarrassing for you. A sigh. Uh, I'll keep that in mind, thanks. Papa needs water. Oi! Ugh. Chapter 6. What does victory mean to you? Randy had been right about it raining later. But alas, in his infinite Randy wisdom, he'd severely underestimated how long it'd take to start. He hadn't set out with any particular destination in mind, content to aimlessly wander dial down bushes and back alleys until he got bored. The sky thusly chose to reward his lack of planning ahead with torrential downpour, trapping him in some backwater corner of Dialtown's downtown he forgot even existed, cowering under a dilapidated roof in a desperate attempt to stay dry, waiting for the rain to let up so he could book it back to the tent without catching ultra-hypothermia. Most of the brick buildings didn't house anything, boasting "For Rent" signs. Randy had never seen them without. The various broken windows were all coated in spiderwebs, and their graffiti was noticeably faded. Nobody wanted to be in a place like this, not even Dialtown's lowlives. He kicked his feet against wet asphalt, careful not to hit any discarded needles or stray shards of glass. Last thing he needed was HIV or HBV or any other horrible H things Genki hadn't infected him with already. As he stood round pitying himself for getting caught in such a stupid predicament, a voice called out through the rolling fog, barely audible under the sound of rain slamming against the ground. Randy? Randy jumped at the sound of his name, almost smacking his head back against weathered brick. There, in the curtain of thick rain, he could make out a familiar figure. Jerry, who noticeably had the forethought to actually wear a raincoat, though even that could only do so much in harsh conditions. The dark brown of the man's shirt looked almost black in places from the amount of water seeped into it. Randy gulped. "Oh, Randy, buddy, what are you doing out here?" Jerry asked in a soft, worried tone of voice, like he had just found a stray puppy alone in a cardboard box. I It had taken him a moment to process he was being spoken to, given the amount of noise. He sheepishly tugged at the now damp cuff of his jacket sleeve. I just got caught in the rain on a walk. The words tumbled out of his throat unnaturally. Stupid Randy. Stupid Randy, making yourself suspicious for no reason. Jerry cocked his head, raindrops trickling down his front. But before he could say anything, Randy continued blathering. So what are you doing out here? Aren't you, usually in the ticket booth around now? And at that, the ticket man sighed, just the mere mention of the fun fair enough to make feelings of dread and misery wash over his heart. Yeah, well, today's actually the singular guaranteed day off I get per year. He twisted in his chair, pointing at the only building behind him that was even remotely presentable. So I'm going to get a hot dog. Randy looked at the hot dog restaurant, then back at Jerry in bewilderment. But the weather's really bad right now. Wouldn't you rather stay at home or something? Look, Randy, I really want that hot dog. It's all I have went unspoken, but Randy nodded, having felt the man's words deep within his broken soul. This was just the way things had to be. Well, in that case, he walked closer. Would it bother you if I came with? He couldn't completely parse the look on Ticket Jerry's face. Some blend of apparent disdain, light disgust, an emotion Randy was quite used to evoking in some people, so there were no hard feelings, and full-on pity. The seconds where the man gave it thought felt long and crawling, but Jerry, as a person, was horrendous at saying no to people who'd done anything short of squirting green nipple juice on his glass pane and laying eggs in his carnival, so it didn't come as a surprise when he shrugged his shoulders, gave Randy a thumbs up. For their choice of hot dog restaurant, Ticket Jerry's positivity was just about the only sliver of warmth that could have been granted. Immediately, Randy's gaze honed in on a shadow loitering outside the establishment, punctuated by a rumble of thunder. Its head wasn't a phone. wasn't an object of any kind, and for a moment Randy thought he could catch raindrops dripping off of a set of whiskers, dark, muddy green eyes glinting in the fog, boring right into him. Randy couldn't stop himself, filthy column bursts scrabbling for grip against the slick asphalt. Finding no purchase as he let out a certifiably effeminate shriek of surprise, staggered back, heels striking a rain puddle, and setting the Nokia in question nearly collapsed right over Jerry's knees. The man in question was probably too used to people's bullshit to even shout back, offering only a spot of disappointed silence as Randy gasped, grappling for the handle of Jerry's wheelchair to probably push himself to his feet. The muddy green glint was gone. The whiskers, too. No, where Randy had flipped his shit over was nothing more than an awaiting statue of chain restaurant mascot. It was a frankly unholy thing to look upon, water damage and chipped ancient paint, giving it the effect of skin peeling right off its bones. But it was sure as hell no Mingus crown, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce upon any poor Randy that may have passed the entrance of hot dog chain restaurant. Randy let out a heavy exhale, finally pulling away from his companion, a man who, no doubt, was beginning to regret his choice of hot dog chain restaurant compatriot. Sorry, he mumbled, fixing his gaze upon the ghastly thing, which he considered easier than looking Jerry in the eye as rain continued to beat down on him, laughing at him, as did everything else in the universe. Nah, Jerry shrugged his shoulders. Shit's freaky. Wheeling into the entrance, his gaze didn't leave the mascot. A horrid thing, human-shaped, coarse sculpted eyes, nose, mouth, and all of which seemed to weep rust. Truly dire to look upon. This place was around since before the dial-up. Lots of press way back then about how back when he was a little flesh boy, Callum Crown had his first hot dog here. Holding the door open for Randy, the other simply scampered on in without thanks, like a deer jolting away from an oncoming 18-wheeler. So they're really into their history. In practice, though, they just have freaky-ass commercials. Ah! Randy, now inside, could see that. Horrid eyes, teeth, tongues, and lips donned the interior of the place, making the warmth of their skin, alongside the rare smell of a hot meal, hard to fully appreciate. Was that even a clown back there? Could you even show that on TV? In front of the children? Jerry, undeterred, made his way over to a table like things were normal, doing his darndest to avoid eye contact with the many flesh-headed taxidermy beasts mounted on the walls. Horrifying as they were not important to the core mission. Hot dog. Randy could only helplessly trail behind on wobbly legs, lost and afraid like a baby horse still wet from the womb. The two of them sat at one of the various window tables. Not that you could tell with the amount of thick greases and grimes running down the glass. You'd be forgiven for thinking it was a weirdly textured brown wall at first glance. Randy shuddered. Surely the rain should be washing some of the gunk off, right? Oh no, that stuff's permanently caked in, Jerry chimed, seemingly reading Randy's mind. I'd wager it's been there longer than the two of us have been alive, he finished, nonchalantly opening one of the table's incredibly sticky menus. Randy trailed off. What was there to be said? What on earth could he possibly say about that? Other than, oh wow, Jerry, that's awesome. Hopefully the windows being covered in filth means any politicians who may or may not want me dead can't snipe me in here. That would be just dandy. This place sure is, unique? The ticket man gave a half-amused throat chuckle. It's not ideal, no. Randy swore he was going to hear the sound of menu pages, somehow both dusty and adhesive, being pulled apart from each other in phone hell for all of eternity when he died. He hadn't even considered touching his own menu yet. Lord knows he'd never be able to get whatever indescribable substance coated the things off his bandages. Instead, he brought his hands sheepishly to his chest, not sure what else to do with them. Oh, phone God, why did we come here? I know it's awful, you know it's awful, Well, hey, no, it's not that bad, Jerry started before pausing. He needed to choose his next words carefully. though in the silence, all Randy could focus on was the yellowed, stained glass light fixture above them, creaking as it swayed in the air-conditioned breeze. With his luck, the thing would probably fall onto their table, shattering into a million glass pieces that would all end up in his jugular. Look, I'll level with you, Jerry finally continued. I know it is absolutely putrid in here. I'm not going to pretend the obvious isn't true. Uh-huh. But none of it matters, because this is the only place in the city where you can get a hot dog with no horse meat or any other weird shit in it. Randy perked up. He couldn't remember the last time he had a hot dog with zero traces of horse. If such an event had ever actually occurred in the first place. Are you serious? Here? Jerry nodded. Yeah, I think it's a pre-dial-up thing. Wait, Randy tilted his head. How are those things related? We are not allowed to disclose that legally, a waitress promptly answered, having seemingly spawned from the fucking ether. Her tone was chipper in a sort of way Randy found painful to listen to, not helped by the fact she was dressed like one of those old-timey 50s roller skate waitresses, though her striped dress unnaturally yellowed and crinkled. It was clearly aged, which struck Randy as odd, considering the woman herself looked rather young. Or, well, it would have had he not been busy being startled half to death. Gah! Oh, hi, Mildred, said Jerry. The waitress, Mildred, perked up at the sight of Jerry. Why, hello there, sugar. So glad you could make it out for your yearly visit. She looked at Randy, still catching his breath, confused, before continuing. Say, is the missus not joining you this year? I noticed last time things seemed rocky. Randy blinked. Was Jerry's marriage going poorly? He didn't actually know the guy that well, so this was the first time he was hearing about it. No, well, she's not here, but it's not... Oh, this must be your rebound then. Happy to see you're putting yourself out there, Jer Bear. She turned to Randy. It's nice to meet you. I'm Mildred, one of the non-specific hot dog restaurant's owners. Both men looked at each other, then back at her, horrified. Their protests of, hey, I'm still married, and I have a loving greed partner at home, blended together into a non-specific loudness, only serving to make their waitress giggle. It's not like that, I promise, a distraught Jerry finally managed to get out clearly. My wife is just at home watching over the Alsatians. They don't do well during storms. They start stress-licking all their ointments off when left unattended for too long. Mildred gave a half-hearted sigh at his statement, disappointed. It's always the sick dogs with you. How many did you say you had again? 10, 9, 11, 12. 12? The woman shook her lemony yellow typewriter head in disapproval. Oh, Jerry, honey, bless your heart. This is no way to be living your life. If I wanted to be scolded for my life choices, I could have just made a hot dog at home. The ticket man spat before immediately retracting. He wasn't especially good at being frustrated with non-phone-gingy people. Can we just order drinks, please? Oh, fine, fine. With a mirth that said, sure, but my coworkers won't hear the end of this gossip. Mildred pulled out a small notepad from her breast pocket. What can I get you boys to drink? Jerry gestured to Randy to answer first, catching him off guard. Shit, no, not again! He started, figuring it was time to face his demons. I'll just take a Hepsi, please. The woman nodded. And for you? Iced tea with lemon. She finished writing her notes before turning on her heel. Coming right up. Randy didn't know how in God's name he didn't hear her approach their table. Those pumps were cartoonishly large. How she didn't live in constant fear of spraining her ankles was beyond him. With her departure came an uncomfortable silence at the table, interrupted only by the background televisions and the faint pitter-patter of rain outside. Randy spoke up first. I'm so sorry about that. No, it's not you. She's just kind of like that, I guess. A pause. So I take it you and Phone Gengi are still an item, then? Jerry asked with a shudder, like the cryptid's name was physically painful for him to say. For a moment, Randy stood on defense, and he was prepared to lob out a million justifications. Don't say that. They're a sweetheart once you get to know 'em. Or even a rare, cocky, yeah, what of it? We're happier than you, bozo, before it all died in his chest. To Jerry, Phone Kingy's presence was just another note of Randy Jade's abject misfortune. Sometimes Randy found himself agreeing. In a way, weren't they to thank for the most recent downward spiral he'd found himself in? Maybe he should have just let the mugger shoot him. It may have made his life a heck of a lot easier for once. Still, that wasn't easy to think, and guilt boiled in Randy's stomach, if that wasn't some kind of food poisoning anyway. Sheepishly, he rubbed the side of his screen and nodded. Yeah, I'm awful sorry about that. Randy couldn't find anything to say at that, busy picking at table grime with a fingernail. They weren't here, but he could feel their muddy green gaze all the same. It wasn't polite. Randall Jade knew, by now, the universe was listening, waiting to grasp at his words and make horrible trauma origami out of them. No, it's... Randy cursed himself for killing the mood, but stammered out all the same. It's fine, really. I mean, look at me, Jerry. He gave himself 2 thumbs up. It's like I always say. Wow, my life just sucks, but it's easier when I have someone other than my trash wife to share my horrible misfortune with. The other didn't seem convinced until Randy remembered, oh yeah, almost divorcee. Well, Jerry began, a nerve audibly pinched, and here Randy felt like sinking into the floor and becoming one with all the pre-dial-up era hot dog grease beneath the earth's crust. I'm sure that feels cathartic in the moment, but I don't think that's what love's about. Not like I would know. Love isn't about funfair egg-laying either, but we make it work. In a substitution of another thumbs up in the name of narrative spontaneity, he offered a pair of waggly fingers instead. Come on, man, just give us your blessing and whatnot. Kiki said they named one of our kids after you. Jerry brightened, and Randy thanked the phone lord for letting them finally drop that topic. Really? More or less. Something starting with a J, but given their extreme illiteracy, the thought's there. I'll take what I can get, Jerry chuckled, and here Randy swore he could see the little green plus sign icon from The Sims above the other's head. This was working! This was a banter! Trademark! There came their drinks. Still, Randy found it hard to make direct eye contact with his ice-cold Hepsi, pouring it down his glass and chucking its container somewhere into the ether the moment it touched his table. A round of more mildly uncomfortable, but not horrific, sometimes even passable, pleasant banter. Then their hot dogs. Respectively, something plain with an endearing amount of relish, and something the typewriter-headed waitress had referred to as the Ultra Dog. Which... Holy shit. Randy wasn't an expert on joy. Even now he didn't fully understand matters of love, couldn't comprehend tales of victory. The sun had never gently shone across his skin at the beach. He'd never felt the ocean in his skin, or the snow of the mountains dust his head. But this... Randall Jade had never devoured something so quickly and with so much vigor in all 25 excruciatingly miserable years of his life. For a fleeting moment, Madame Mediocre, the Swan Torment, the Hotline, the Egg Quest, the murders, all of it was worth it. Anything that resulted in this much delicious, relishy hot dog being shoved down his disgusting phone gullet was worth it. It was better than money, better than sex. It was... Oh my God. Jerry felt a wave of smugness wash over him. Everyone always questioned him, his attachment to this non-specific hot dog restaurant. They thought he was crazy, thought he was a misery-stricken lunatic who knew nothing of cuisine. But they'd all see. It's good, right? He asked, a prideful mischievousness in his tone. Randy frantically nodded, his pace dangerous for someone with what was essentially a glorified bomb for a head. Oh my God, Jeremy. Jerry, I think I'm gonna nut everywhere. Okay, that thought might have been a little much. Please don't do that. But the Nokia could barely register that anyone was talking to him. His senses to him immersed in the hot dog's divinity, until it was all gone, all 6 or so inches chewed, swallowed, then condemned to digest in his horrible stomach. That wouldn't do. Randy wasn't finished yet. There was a craving for ball game worthy dogs that not even God could satisfy. Jerry, oh my God, I need more of these. Right now, I think I'm going to die. Am I allowed to ask for another one? He asked, nearly begged, like a child badgering his mom in the candy aisle of any given store. Ticket Jerry had created a monster. He did his darndest to stammer out a response between bites of his own dog. Well, potentially yes, but what? But it would cost more money, Randy, which is not something you tend to have. Jerry recalled the sad amount of change Randy pulled out of his pocket at the egg date, the memory flooding him with secondhand embarrassment. If that poor schmuck couldn't afford a lousy funfair ticket, there was no way he could afford 2 hot dogs and a drink. Not in this economy, anyways. Randy, however, was too caught up in the joys of horse-free wiener to remember his own lore, loudly blurting out, I can afford it. I've got money. This was news to Ticket Jerry, who had once seen Randy cry over not having enough money to afford a 25-cent gumball at the mall. Since when? Fuck! The storm's thunder roared outside. A crack of lightning managed to pierce through the window's dense grime. Randy swallowed hard. What was he supposed to say? How could he possibly justify this giant gaping hole in the fabric of the universe? Everyone knew that Randy Jade was always poor. Always! It was his karmic destiny, his curse to bear forever. Oh God, would Jerry leave? Call the police? Call the Alsatians? That would be too much. Randy knew if he let that happen, he'd be the first person to somehow contract eczema from another living creature. Oh God, he couldn't afford ointments, especially not combined with the swan rash. No, he couldn't be found out. Not yet. Not like this. Come on, Randy, think! Think! He just had to say something. Anything. The first thing he thought of. I don't like talking about it much, he started, voice even more pathetic than usual. But you're really nice, Jerry. The sudden change in tone caught Jerry off guard. He wondered if he had done something wrong, committed a social taboo by pointing out Randy's financial status. People tended not to like it very much when you did that. He anxiously twiddled his fingers together, his worried gaze fixated entirely on the man across the table. It's just, well, my jobs don't pay me very much. A technically true sentence. And I've been struggling to make rent, so I... Come on, Randy, it's make or break it. Don't hold back! I've been selling my decrepit pale body out on the street to make ends meet. What the fuck? Something changed then in Jerry's expression. For Randy was used to being pitied, by him of all people especially. But in that moment, the man genuinely looked as if someone had stuck each and every one of his dogs, ex-wives, well-paying film fare customers, and also his mother for good measure, alive, into a carrot juicer, and he could only gawk upon the meaty results. For a moment, Randy was prepared to backpedal. He was just about to, until the sheer embarrassment sent him bursting into tears, all over his relished swan juice-coated hands, and that sealed the deal. The rain was forgotten. The hot dogs, the Alsatians, the eggs, all of it. Randy, Jerry began, voiced low with concern, but oh baby, the wheels of the tragedy train were a-rolling, and on their way to careening into a nearby orphanage. It's horrible, Jerry! If you thought the hotline was bad, imagine the depravity of people who aren't satiated with dirty talk alone! Think about the fucking clowns, Jerry! They all come never-ending handkerchiefs! I have to watch them all pile out of their comically small cars one by one, all of them with their schwanguses out! In a decade, Randy Jade's name would sit next to Callum Crowns himself in terms of Dialtown, Wisconsin's most psychologically intriguing individuals, and they would all cite this very hot dog restaurant. And they make me wear a fucking thong! Do I look like I can pull off a thong? Jerry's expression silently asked, Do you want me to answer that honestly?
Randy paid it no mind, continuing this train wreck for as long as he still had air in his lungs to do so with. And people keep fucking dying, and I don't know what's going on, and every day, every day, I'm scared it's gonna be me next, and I'll have nothing to show for it but the fucking thong, and the fucking hot dogs, and the fucking eggs. I don't even want... Hey, buddy, Jerry began, glancing over his shoulder at the extremely confused patrons. Let's stop before we say something we regret, okay? Do I look like I asked for this life, Jerry? Huh? Randy, hey, look at me. Let me walk you through this, okay? Jerry's hands were raised in caution, like he was approaching a snarling, sick animal. Just... Oh, phone god, can you sit back down, please? No, we don't do that with our plates, Randy. Truth be told, Randy heard each and every one of the man's words, but there was something about the concern in his voice, inhibitions gone in favor of trying to settle down the animal he'd been unfortunate enough to pick a lunch date with, that made something click in Randy's head. It was so normal, and very well adjusted about the matter. How could someone so downright pathetic ever hurt someone, except for maybe himself? Yeah, that's what this was. A calculated act of psychological manipulation. He was the one in power here. He was helping clear his name for any eyeing Dialtown government agents. World 0, Randy Jade 1. Suck it! Surely not engaging in a crude, self-centered, borderline masturbatory show of how Randy Jade's shit life bought him a get-out-of-jail-free cards, if nothing else, for if he wasn't pitiful, wasn't sucking at porta-potty water and wrangling swans to make it through the day, what excuse did he have for what he'd done, the person he could feel himself becoming? Well, whatever helped him sleep at night. A few gruesome descriptions of clown orgasms later, there was no more pondering Randy could have on his words, no takesies backsies. The storm had settled, Jerry had wheeled out of his place across the table to join his friend's side, a hand on his shoulder, perhaps Dialtown's biggest, most pathetic victim as ever. The fact he had bolted out told Randy all he needed to know, a thought that twisted the sob in his hands into a laugh, but the sound was the same. Randy only trembled against Jerry's touch, raising his head to produce a disgustingly pathetic sniffle. His skull, and all it contained, throbbed. Slowly, out-dripped tears welled from the corners of his screen, or bits of ice from his Hepsi, neither of them were sure. I'm scared, Jerry. That much was obvious. I don't want to die. And truth was, he didn't. Why, he couldn't place. Was it Fongingi? This, or just the pumping, ceaseless survival adrenaline of someone who knew their time was up? He wouldn't make it in prison. Phone God knew that. He didn't want to be hated. But what more was there for him, really? Randy crumpled, hearing none of Jerry's faint, vague, deeply perplexed reassurances as he collapsed into the man's shoulders. He felt like he had at the Olive Garden, every piece of him twitching, alive, wrong. Thoughts, justifications, all pulling out of his non-existent ears. Nobody's gonna die, he finally caught Tikajiri say. The world's not that cruel. You're in a pretty dog-shit place. But you gotta talk about it, and... He trailed off, unsure, and Randy couldn't read the look in his face beyond an overwhelming pity. You'll keep on living, if nothing else. God knows you're like Dialtown's personal cockroach. There came an affectionate head, touched perhaps, weary of dislodging the bandage, or sending its owner sobbing and throwing trays once again. Talk to Fungingi about all of this. Or, like, a therapist or something? That's probably better. With another rancid sniffle, Randy nodded. People care for you, Randall, Jerry finished, offering a weak thumbs up. That's, about all that keeps me going some days. Yeah? Randy responded with a hoarse softness, the kind that forced Jerry to vividly imagine how all the earlier crying and wailing must have shredded poor Randy's vocal cords. I'm so sorry to hear that it's a struggle to keep going for you too, I mean. Despite the awkwardness of the angle, the Nokia shifted to rest his head against the other man's shoulder, in much the same way a particularly spoiled cat starts nuzzling its owner around dinner time. Phone God, Jerry, Randy continued. Here I am, a lowly man of the streets. A mere honkman harlot, crying to you about my clown woes when you have to spend all day at the birthplace, the genesis of clowndom. Jerry, visibly caught off guard, took a minute to formulate a response. Hey, no, come on, it's not that bad. He trailed off, lost in the way Randy oh so sadly held onto the raincoat he never got around to taking off, suddenly rubbing his screen into Jerry's damp collarbone. He couldn't place the emotion welling in his chest. Pity? Embarrassment? Some horrible form of cuteness aggression? The ticket man couldn't say. All he could do was place a tentative hand on the other's head, mindful of the bandage, like consoling a scared, sickly dog, an act that overwhelmed Randy's misnatured heart with glee. The funfair isn't great. In fact, it's often deeply hellish and makes me want to hurt myself and others. Uh-huh. But only about, 35% of that has to do with the job itself. This was news to Randy. Though he'd never pondered any of the specifics of working at a funfair ticket booth before, he'd always assumed constant proximity to the funfair to be a devastatingly soul-crushing way to live, though it's not like he wasn't biased. What's the other? He paused to do the mental math. 65%. Well, Jerry scoffed, at least 20% is phone gangy. That got a genuine laugh out of Randy, despite his best efforts to remain as deceptively pathetic and weepy as possible. But most of it is just, God, my boss, he's the absolute fucking worst. Randy cocked his head, still pressed unusually close to his lunch date, in earnest. How so? It's just, Jerry stammered. Randy, you're going through a lot right now. I don't want to add to it with my bountiful well of complaints. There it was, his chance to seal the deal, to ensnare this poor ticket bastard as his eternal sympathizer, the winning move in the ever-elaborate game of life and death Randall v. Jade had meticulously crafted. He thanked Phone God, Phone Jesus, Callum Crown himself for the fact he had no mouth to portray the vainglorious, shit-eating grin brewing inside of him. He wiped a tear from his screen, softening his voice in the sweetest, most woeful way he could manage. It's okay. I don't mind at all. With that, Jerry exhaled. Now that he'd been prompted, there seemed awfully little to say. How much of it had idly swirled around his head over the ages? Surely his wife had to be long since fed up with his complaining, especially as it wasn't like the man had many other options for what to do with his life to keep afloat. Dialtown wasn't running short on pathetic human beings. Sure, Randy stood atop them all, by virtue of being Randy, but he struggled to imagine the way outsiders must have looked upon the city. Even its mayor was, all things considered, a pretty sad person. But, and Randy had been learning this, ever since the evening he stared down an empty gun in the subway, there was a fond pity, one where your heart ached to do anything to help, and there was the kind of pity people like the mugger, like the hotline clients, like Abel Brannigan inspired. You looked at them and you wonder how someone so heartless, so devoid of any ounce of merit, talent, scrap of affection for the world, made it to adulthood, much less made it to their position of power, their foot against your head as they ground you into the dirt and made you lap your own blood off the pavement. To Chicken Jerry, however, it was a banal but all right thing. A fact of life, and perhaps one Randy Jade could have grasped were he less cosmically unlucky. The city's economy's pretty shit, but properly moving would be a hassle even without the Alsatians, for his family had a fondness for this place. His job, his marriage too, all pretty shit, but he offers himself the half-hearted assurance that there's something greater on the horizon one day, and that's enough to keep trucking. Abel himself, the bastard men to all bastard men, but hey, at least the mockery, and insistent on taking half the measly stipend Jerry earned from himself, ended with the workday. To be honest, it started to feel stupid the moment it left his mouth. Ticket Jerry, after all, had more shame than Randy did, which wasn't hard to accomplish. Abel, for all his faults, wasn't pressing a gun to his head and combing colorful handkerchiefs at him. At least not yet, anyway. So how much could he complain, really? Enough to fill the evening, apparently. Oh, you wouldn't believe what he told me last weekend. Can you believe what he said to my wife when she asked if he could, phone God forbid, spare a measly dime for one of the ointments we turned up short on? And the shit he'll bring to the local potlucks, you've no idea. He thinks just because he's got the mayor in his pocket. Yada yada. The rain had let up for about 10 minutes by the time Jerry spared the suitably ancient clock on the wall of non-specific hot dog restaurant a look and realized how late it was, giving a tired laugh that Randy didn't quite understand, an assurance of, "Hey, thanks, maybe we'll do this next year," before grabbing his things, stopping to pay, and leaving. Sometimes a guy just needed to bitch. Jerry's heart felt remarkably lighter as he made his way back home, grateful to no longer need the raincoat over his shoulders, starting to make him sweat, that damn thing was. He got a hot dog out of the ordeal, and a talk with a friend to boot, awkwardness aside. Perhaps he'd think to keep an eye out for Randy, sad sack the lad was, his coming work week, just in case Fungingi roped him into another date at the fun fair. Jerry tried not to sigh aloud at the thought of another week of riveting hijinks, another snap from his boss to try and clean off that damn nipple juice. But, like the rest of his life, it didn't make him happy, no, but it was something to do. Something he'd perhaps even look fondly back on one day, in some future where he'd had it made, where the air was light and his hip didn't hurt. Maybe he could even write a book someday, with one of those smarmy forewords, "To the conniving boss and the cryptid who made my life hell. Look who's had it made." Wouldn't that have been nice? The Alsatians were quiet on his return, his wife idly dozing on the couch. He leaned down to affectionately nudge his head on hers, a faint clack, and she murmured something, earning a moody writhe from one of the dogs intent on trapping her feet against the cushions. Outside, the storm was long since over, offering not even pattering against the windows in protest as Jerry maneuvered to the bedroom, shuffling through the clothes in his drawer, hoping to shower before it got too dark out. In the back of his head, knowing to be grateful for a human-skin partner, lukewarm water, and a place to sleep if nothing else, he hoped Randy had gotten home all right. The next morning, Jerry almost didn't wake up at all. The low rumbling of the subway did little to soothe his tiredness, his optical sensors flickering as he faded in and out of consciousness. Normally on dour mornings like this, he at least had the chitter-chatter of other passengers to latch onto. It's not exactly easy to fall asleep when some jackass decides to blabber on the phone between loud sips of overpriced coffee right next to you. But alas, no such migraine-inducing businessmen had been on board. As if everyone else besides Jerry had the sense to stay in bed, sealed away from the dreary February air. He placed a tired hand on his temple. There was something uncomfortable about the harsh lighting of the subway car, something unnatural in the way its stark hues of white and gray bounced off the metallic surface of his head. The sort of artificial haziness found only in limbo and the light bulb department of home improvement stores. The feeling remained even after getting off the train. It lingered in the air, dripping off the station's manila brick walls down into the faded hemlock of the grass outside. Truth be told, Jerry hadn't been sleeping well. Between grueling funfair hours and the horrific sleep schedules of the Alsatians, all slightly out of sync with each other, he had very little time to relax. He distantly thought of upping his melatonin intake. Clearly it was not doing enough. Or maybe looking into some other sleep aids. Benadryl, maybe? NyQuil? The horrible oils girls who bullied him in high school try to sell him on phone book? He supposed it wouldn't make a difference. Doesn't matter how many pills you take when there's a whining, sickly dog climbing on top of you. Speaking of which, he had to remember to schedule a vet appointment during his lunch break. One of his dogs, God help him for not remembering which one, was having non-eczema related issues with its paw. A split nail if he was remembering correctly. Not particularly uncommon in dogs, even healthy ones, but annoying to treat all the same. Through the fog of morning drowsiness, Jerry thought about a lot of things. Boring stuff. Questions of upcoming dentist appointments, bill payments, what color him and the missus wanted to repaint the living room, replacing their canine insurance. The kind of stressors you only think about when the world isn't moving fast enough to pull your attention away. It wasn't until he reached the rusted mauve of the ticket booth that Jerry realized he was late to work by a good 7 or so minutes. Normally Abel, plague be upon him, would have been yapping his ear off about it by now, like he could smell lateness. Jerry was far too out of it to question the strangeness of his boss's absence. He was just happy the old bastard wasn't giving him any trouble for now. Without him, the morning air, stagnant and cold as it may have been, felt peaceful, even if he could see the chill of his own breath in front of him. It was still February, after all. He could only expect so much. Then, after putting the busted old key into the lock, through the uncomfortable dreamlike haze of his exhaustion, he saw it. Inside the ticket booth, spattered across gray walls and tawny flooring, was a red so vibrant Jerry could have sworn it was glowing. For a moment the world stood still. Purple. That was the second color Jerry could make out, once gaudy shades of purple permanently stained, unevenly speckled with shades of wine and rosewood. Bruised fingertips dangled in carmine puddles, the way one might sway their legs over the side of a swimming pool to cool off. Death, as Jerry Gold knew it, was something dignified, even in tragedy. The corpses in his late-night mystery novels decorated its victims in subtle flashes of crimson, non-graphic stab wounds, tasteful trickles of blood pushing out from behind number plates and tabulator bars. Even on the news or in crime documentaries, most of them had the sense to cover up anything particularly grisly. Anything more than that would render the whole affair painfully juvenile. The sight laid out before him carried such a childish lack of restraint that he couldn't help but gawk. It no longer resembled a person, that much was obvious. Lying there in the ticket booth was an act of spectacle, a tacky Halloween decoration, comically unfortunate roadkill. Its head was crudely dented in the center, folding in on itself with all the tact of a cartoon accordion. What if its wrist had been so badly broken it looked like its hand was on backwards, the resulting bruise so harsh you'd be excused for thinking it was the result of a bored special effects artist with nothing better to do? Why would... Who... What... Huh? The surrounding clamor of birds, clearly unbothered by the shift in atmosphere, did little to clear his head. Was this a prank? A little fuck you after his one day off? It had to be, right? Why else would something like that be in his ticket booth? The lump of meat crumpled up in the corner didn't give him a response. He'd never admit this to anyone for as long as he'd live, swear up and down it never happened, desperately scrub the moment from his memory of this any time he was made to relive it. But in that moment, for the agonizing long seconds it took him to get his head on straight, Jerry laughed. A slight chuckle so restrained you would have had to be pushed right up against his chest to hear it. It was just his luck, wasn't it? Heaven forbid he complained about his boss to a friend one singular time. Is that what this was? The universe's way of telling him, be careful what you wish for? Was his life not cartoonishly awful enough? Was it missing some good old-fashioned blood on the ceiling? Perhaps a bit of early morning corpse stink? Jerry's gaze never faltered from the ticket booth until he finally realized what he was looking at. This was the human equivalent of a dead rat left at the foot of your bed, a result of misplaced kindness. A present, laid out just for him. The kind that whoever made it worked really hard on. A shiver ran up his spine. It was another thing old Ticket Jerry would take to his grave, a thought he immediately tried to claw out of his brain. But as he stared at the pale, beaten corpse of Abel Brannigan, the first and only suspect he could think of left him in the form of a shaky murmur, even if he knew it wasn't possible. Randy? Indeed, just a few short miles away, in a moment Jerry would never see, the perpetrator, somehow more scuffed up than usual, creeped into a lone tent in the middle of the park, and with a voice sweet as honey, he whispered to his lover, "Hey, babe, I think you should check the fun fair." End of Part 2.